Hi, I'm Dr. Tim Radak, and I made this video today, which was a critique and scientific review of a video that was posted on YouTube between the Harvard doctor, Dr. Georgia Eady, on the Primal Podcast, a animal product-centric page that is on YouTube where Dr. Eady was invited to discuss foods that cause brain disease as part of a book that she had written earlier this year. So as a public health nutritionist and a plant-based researcher, I'd like to share a different perspective based on that discussion that was had on YouTube. I'm not looking really to debate, but I'm rather providing a different scientific-based critique and view to consider in addition to what was posted. So Dr. Eady seems to be saying that for most of us, we've been misled in feeding our brains incorrectly, and that all of her health symptoms personally were resolved by not following the standard recommendations in the U.S. in terms of dietary and nutrition guidance, and instead following an animal protein-centric diet replete with cholesterol and saturated fat, as well as one that's low in fiber and plants. And she's not convinced that we need anything beyond meat, period. To provide you with a few quotes from that YouTube video, you really need to look no further than the standard dietary recommendations that we've been given for so long to find the ingredients that directly promote all those drivers of poor mental health. There's no science behind the majority of recommendations. A healthy diet needs to contain whole grains, that it should be based on grains and legumes, that the more plants you eat, the better, the less red meat you eat, the better, to be careful and mindful of saturated fat intake, that plant proteins are superior to animal proteins, and that you must eat a wide variety of fruits and vegetables every day. All these beliefs about nutrition, there's no science behind them whatsoever. There's no logic, there's no biology, no rationale. They come from untested theories. So I was pretty awestruck that such an extreme opinion in the nutrition world could be perpetrated. So I wanted to provide some science-based rationale for a different perspective. She also goes on to say, I'm not convinced that we need to include anything beyond meat if we really don't want to. But I think most of us can be robustly healthy if we include a decent amount of plant food in the diet, but we need to understand that not all plant foods are equal. Many plant foods have more risks than benefits, and that if one has a diet that's based on grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, one is basing a diet on some of the least nutritious and riskiest plant foods. She lastly goes on to say that our body can produce glucose from fats and proteins and do so smoothly, and we don't need to consume carbohydrates for a glucose source. Yes, you heard that right. So with a sample size of 1, does the research reflect what was said by Dr. Eady? I'll state clearly, I did not read her book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, for what some of the research she might have cited. However, to say there is almost no science, biology, or logic behind the majority of current recommendations for a healthy diet, which was mentioned whole grains, legumes, a variety of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, as examples, is just completely unfounded and contrary to literally every aspect of nutritional research that's gone on for decades. So that's quite a concern. Let me question this perspective a little bit deeper, and I'll just take fiber as one example. And there's plenty of research, and not just observational perspective studies, but randomized trials and interventions demonstrating the beneficial effects of fiber. This includes the production of anti-inflammatory compounds in our gut that influence the gut-brain axis. As one example, short-chain fatty acids serve as the primary source of energy for the colonic epithelium, and they produce anti-inflammatory compounds like butyrate, acetate, and propionate. These also competitively exclude the detrimental pathogenic bacteria. These are all benefits that are found from fiber. Specialized colonic microbes also break down plant cell walls and release phytochemicals such as polyphenols, anthocyanins, phenolics, and flavins, all of which have anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and anti-neoplastic properties. What provides fiber in the diet? We certainly know that animal products contain zero and that plants are the source. Another example of just how important a role plants play in our gut health is the relationship to immune health. For example, intestinal immune cells have specific receptors and proteins for individual specific phytochemicals that are found in fruits and vegetables that enhance and sustain intestinal immune function within the gut. And these also reduce the risk for other diseases like colon cancer. This provides a solid link between the gut and immune function and makes a case to suggest that green vegetables in particular are actually required or essential to maintain intestinal immune cells. And again, these are coming from plants, not from animals. Separately, there's potential harms from animal product consumption, which again contain no fiber, and these include the production of microbial metabolite trimethylene N oxide, what we refer to as TMAO, which has been associated with neuroinflammatory processes, or animal products and the production of advanced glycation end products. So why, when comparing a plant-based diet to a high-fat diet and saturated fat Atkins diet for 4 weeks in a trial showed that large increases of TMAO were produced, as well as branched-chain amino acids in plasma, which are known cardiovascular risk factors? Why is it that omnivores have a worse inflammatory profile than vegetarians? So it's interesting that Dr. Edie mentions that we don't need any carbohydrate at all and can make glucose from fats and proteins smoothly, which ignores some of the benefits of carbohydrates and ignores some of the risks from meat-centric diets that are high in animal protein and animal fat. And the spike, glucose spike from exogenous carbs, yes. Refined carbs, certainly. If you have a large soda that is not nutrient dense, and it's just basically a sugar river, that's going to create a spike and also result in inflammation. But to include all carbs in that take, for example, complex carbs, which are nutrient dense, they do not do that. To provide a few examples, why do trials with plant-based diets do a better job at controlling and improving glycemic control, insulin resistance, and reducing risk, or even reversing type 2 diabetes and cardiometabolic risk factors than non-vegetarian diets, as well as reducing inflammatory markers? One reason may be because of the protective nutrients like polyphenols or fiber, which can inhibit glucose absorption while enhancing insulin-dependent glucose uptake. And this may be why a recent meta-analysis of studies in over 1.4 million people found a significant increased risk for type 2 diabetes with meat intake, either processed meat or unprocessed meat, and further increases in consumption of meat for each 20-gram portion. There were significant increased risks, whereas plant protein sources did not increase risk. Why is it that vegan or vegetarian diets in trials or dietary interventions have all resulted in improvement in inflammatory autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, nephritis, systematic lupus erythematosus, or Sjögren's syndrome patients? It's easy to knock carbs, and I agree, a poorly planned diet that promotes excess insulin is not good, but refined carbs are the concern, not whole food-based carbohydrates. Conversely, several studies suggest saturated fat is implemented in reducing insulin sensitivity by incorporation into the cell membranes, which affect the ability for insulin to do its job. We absolutely do need to get a handle on the processed food intake we consume. It's roughly 50% of food consumed in the household, for example, in the US. There's no doubt that the standard American diet is unhealthy for brain health, not to mention just about any chronic disease. And Dr. Edie is correct in relating inflammation in brain health and the benefit from antioxidants. Processed foods, which are addictive in nature, contain refined sugars, incite inflammation. They're not nutrient dense, and as I mentioned, make up 50% of the total caloric intake in the household in the US and are a relatively recent phenomenon. Thank you, food industry, over the last several decades. They've been associated with a host of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, dementia, as well as Alzheimer's disease. So yes, a diet approach to brain health is important, but to advocate for the consumption of meat and cholesterol and exclaim hazard of plants is not an accurate determination based on the available science. If plants, fruits, and vegetables and spices are so harmful to our health, why is it that some of the longest living people in the 6 blue zones, for example, on the planet consume mostly plants? Why is it that Tsunami and Mosazen tribes in the Amazon rainforest have some of the lowest incidence of Alzheimer's disease on the planet, as well as dementia and less age-related brain atrophy, and they eat a predominantly complex carbohydrate diet, low in fat and saturated fat? Why is it that plant-based diet interventions have been shown to lower blood pressure, angina, and even reverse type 2 diabetes? I was really lost about the topic of how plants store energy, and humans do not store this as fat. Why even the comparison? No one would argue that, but it would be a stretch to say humans need to get an exogenous fat source rather than carbohydrates simply because we store fat or because the body has about a day's worth of glucose storage. To exclude other well-known disease risks with meat consumption, particularly colorectal cancer, is also a concern. It should not be ignored that the World Health Organization has classified processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen and red meat as a Group 2A probable carcinogenic. Additionally, there is significant non-observational research to demonstrate the hazards of animal product intake on our nation's top killer, cardiovascular disease. Ingestion of a fatty meal can induce postprandial lipemia and angina pectoris for 5 hours after ingestion, which can promote inflammation and injure the arterial endothelium. Saturated fat in clinical studies was found to be more harmful than simple sugars and increases in insulin resistance. Oxidized lipoproteins and cholesterol by consuming cooked meat is absorbed into the bloodstream, injures the endothelial lining, and incites atherogenesis by plaque formation. Metabolic studies support saturated fat as adversely affecting coronary heart disease risk, with meat-based diets increasing blood viscosity compared to vegetarian diets, which reduce blood viscosity. The latter likely due to the antioxidants and low levels of saturated fat in that diet. An analysis of studies looking at high protein intake suggested that consumption of high protein diets may affect immune cells, leading to arterial plaque formation. What's the only diet I'm aware of that actually has been shown to reverse cardiovascular disease? That diet is a vegan diet or a plant-based diet along with lifestyle interventions. Several case studies on patients also demonstrate improvement in heart failure symptoms, reversal of angina, and one whose angina returned with resumption of an animal product-rich diet. Will taking patients with cardiovascular disease and changing their diet to a keto or animal-dominant diet yield the same results? LDL cholesterol, for example, is a known risk factor for cardiovascular disease and not just from observational studies. A recent meta-analysis of low-carb trials suggests an overall increase in LDL cholesterol in normal weight people. And while observational studies did not find low-carb diets to increase cardiovascular disease incidence, that is probably because most are not able to stay on the diet for long periods of time. What is consistent, however, is the 30% increase in overall mortality from following low-carb diets, as the scientific statement from the National Lipid Association Nutrition and Lifestyle Task Force noted recently. A recent clinical trial looking at the keto diet for a 3-month period of time also suggested that in addition to the predictable loss in fat mass, restricting carbohydrates via reducing glucose tolerance negatively impacted the gut microbiome with reduced beneficial gut bacteria, with the authors suggesting that the results did not necessarily produce a cardiometabolic health benefit that would have been expected by the weight loss that was observed in the study. Having myself once eaten as an omnivore, I followed what the preponderance of research has suggested, that following a whole foods, minimally processed, plant-based diet is the best bet for chronic disease, risk reduction, as well as brain health, and a better environmental footprint to boot. I've written about the topic specifically of brain health extensively, addressing diet and other lifestyle factors, and have provided a link to that review below. It's important to be careful in advocating something for just one disease state, such as brain health, without factoring in other diseases or even the environment. And to exclude the relation between food choices and the environment is increasingly considered irresponsible, and in my opinion, selfish. Food systems account for roughly a third of global GHG emissions. A lot of research is happening in this area, and I'll share a few examples. Shifting from a red meat to principally plant-based protein diet may reduce global annual dietary emissions by 17%. And even a flexitarian diet approach can considerably reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well. Even compared to a Mediterranean diet, a vegan diet was suggested to incur a 44% less total environmental impact. So it's important to care for our health, but it's also important and a responsibility to care for our planet. And it concerns me when books like this or reviews come out and just focus on something specific like brain health and ignore all of this other correlated information and impact. A meat diet was suggested to affect greenhouse gas emissions twice of the amount as a vegan diet, with a vegan diet having less water and land use and less loss of biodiversity. Just research the loss of precious rainforest land due to animal agriculture in South America for more information. This is something important to consider when you decide to follow a carnivore, paleo, or ketogenic diet. This is what happens when a psychiatrist delves into diet, as we have also seen with physicians, for example, Dr. Gundry, and underscores the importance of having a solid background in nutrition or seeking input from those who do. Yes, like many areas of science and medicine, there can be incorrect or biased information. And the federal dietary guidelines, for example, have a way to go in translating the available research. But to say there's almost no science, biology, or logic behind the majority of recommendations for the healthy diet. Again, she mentioned whole grains, legumes, and a wide variety of fruits and vegetables and more plants, and that these have no value from epidemiological studies and instead advocate meat and exogenous cholesterol in the context of ignoring the other disease and environmental risks. This does not seem wise, nor does it seem like she's looking at all of the available research. Many of the studies that I used in this scientific review are freely available online. Look them up. Judge for yourself. Even the carnivore MD, the author of the book, The Carnivore Code, has reversed his position on the diet and stopped eating the carnivore diet after several years because he saw several things that were appearing to be going in the wrong direction of health, including testosterone levels, sleep disturbances, heart palpitations, muscle cramps, and others. Those links below, which discusses what the Carnivore MD has shown. I appreciate you listening to this review. All of the references cited are below. There's almost 60 studies that were used in this review, and they're all available on the blog post that I made for this scientific review. Thank you.